Imagine by Bernard King and Nicholas Lumarine. Episode 10. Now Jemma is demanding new sex games, and Nicholas's plot for Imagine takes a revealing turn. She leaned forward and kissed the side of his face. If I didn't feel something for you, would I go to all this trouble to please you? Her logic was crazy, but went on hold. He could not speak. She was kissing him. He could not move. She was on top of him. He did not want to struggle. She was caressing him. This time, there were no guns flying, no chairs crashed, no neighbours shouted. The morning was just one long, tender heaven. Jemma Lumarine was all woman, and this morning she had been all his. They lunched on the terrace of the hotel at a rear table out of sight. Jerome explained about his telephone theory and lack of a follower. Gemma's reaction was swift. Her iPhone cracked to pieces under her heel. Nicholas, she explained, was getting very excited and furious about his book, both at the same time. He could see dozens of possibilities for the plot. His slurred confession to her that the scenes were leaping into his head so quickly he was forgetting most of them before he could make notes, had prompted a new theory from Jemma. The new book is so different from his usual junk, she explained. It seems he has found a whole new world to write about. With his vivid imagination, it has made everything so much easier. He was now spending days at his screen, and for the first time for yonks, had eased down on his drinking. What about the office, the visit to Brighton, me being followed? For Jerome, a writer's inspiration and the concrete world did not mix. Do you have another explanation, she accused. He hadn't, so she continued. Nicholas had a problem, a big problem. The pleasure of his new book was not felt by Nicholas's publisher. It was out of genre, out of style, and as far as the publisher was concerned, out of his office. Nicholas had asked her to use her charms to persuade him to change his mind, but if she couldn't, he would find another publisher. The reason for rejection? His new book was too mundane and too tame. That, thought Jerome, might be the opinion shared by the public, but there was nothing tame or mundane about the way Nicholas was getting his material. The discussion continued throughout the lunch, ending with the agreement that they were no nearer an answer to the Nicholas nightmare. Finishing their meal, they crossed the esplanade and stepped down onto the beach. The flinty ring of pebbles scattered by their feet echoed back from the sea wall, punctuating his bafflement. The impossible couldn't, but was happening. He took her hand, but this was quickly brushed aside. The gap she made between them as they walked suggested acquaintance, removing any hint of intimacy. Of course, he was back with jet-set Jemma, paparazzi fodder. I think I can help you with your follower, she admitted. The echo of the pebbles switched off, astonishment blocking his legs. Her scenario was simple. He was 45, good-looking, easy-going, and attractive, but married. You told me a little fib, my darling, she chided. When her research turned up that he was a deserted husband, it also revealed a variable. Variables worry me, she continued. A wife I could handle. A variable I couldn't. You may have had 3 or 4 variables, like girlfriends. She could not have scandal. Rejected women behave irrationally. She had to know everything about him, so she had him followed. But I could not trust my private detective. He was a real mess. One follower turned up when it suited him, so she hired a second. Then the first follower reappeared and followed both Jerome and his follower. I don't suppose you realized, but for a while you were being followed by 2 people. Obviously, I couldn't tell you. Jerome said nothing. He was learning more about his girlfriend, and some of the mystery of the last few weeks was clearing. So I changed the detective agency. The first one was not just inefficient, they were a disaster. Apparently, they had hired a violent hooligan totally unsuited to the job. In his first weeks, he attacked 2 of their clients. One was a government high-up whom he robbed of a gas canister. The other was you. It was the moment. Why me was screaming for an answer. She was confessing her indiscretions. She was spending a lot of time and a lot of money on him. The question was bubbling up between them. It was the one he should have asked weeks ago. She picked up his gaze, reading the weight in his eyes. Okay, Jemma, but why me? His eyes were drilling into her. Why did you pick me up? Anticipation. She almost smoothed the word out in front of him. Anticipation, anticipation, anticipation. Slipping her arm around his waist, she walked him slowly towards a bench, sitting him down beside her. Think of my life, Jerome. Living in a huge flat in central London, married to fame, every need catered for, having whatever she wanted. Her list, she informed him, could go on to the end of the rainbow. For 5 years, she played the required character, joining the right clubs, being seen at the right places, and arranging lavish lunches for guests who could further her husband's writing career. At first, I enjoyed it, meeting the rich and famous, attending the social events, and knocking myself out for charitable functions. Then I realized the rich and famous were only interested in themselves. The social events, after the 10th visits, were solidifying my grey matter, and most of the charities I worked for were exposed as tax fiddles. A trouble-free life of luxury and comfort could not be considered a trap. But add a drunken, violent husband with a first-class degree in jealousy, and the picture of Valhalla began to crack. For Jerome, the question was obvious. So why do you stay with him? If her husband was such a bastard, she could divorce him and take him for millions. Nicholas and I were at drama school together. I was going to be a wonderful actress, and he was going to be a successful actor. And for a while, it seemed that the roar of the grease paint and the smell of the crowd would be our future. The acrid smell of cheap tobacco swirled between them. At the far end of the bench, an old man was puffing on a huge pipe, changing the taste and aroma of their local atmosphere. Then the inevitable happened. She opened a wallet from her bag and passed Jerome a small leather frame. The boy in the photograph was maybe 8, 9, or even 10. His smile and the way he held himself, establishing beyond doubt it was Jemma's son. If I left Nicholas, I would not see my son again for a long time. The threat had been hurled at her many times during Nicholas's drunken fits. I could not have the publicity, courts, and the unpleasantness near my son. Since, Nicholas has used the threat whenever he wants his own way. The coughing from the corner restarted as the hot smoke singed through the old man's lungs. Most people struggle to buy things they need or to succeed in their careers. Imagine how satisfying it is to reach your target after beating all problems and overcoming all obstacles. The achievement injects new life, energy, enthusiasm. Having the means to buy or do whatever I want destroys that euphoria. I have a gilded life of emptiness. She stared out at the empty space of the sea. It was some time before she spoke, choosing her words with care. Anticipation is something that cannot be bought, it cannot be ordered, and it cannot be delivered. It is not tangible. Jerome nodded at the sea. There was nowhere else to nod. Since meeting Jemma, he had discovered anticipation, big time. It was also an ideal vehicle for Jemma to play with, to explore situations and ideas she perhaps could not control. And you would be my playmate. Without taking her eyes off the waves, she took his hand. Her expression was as far away as the horizon. She had spent many weeks finding Jerome. Her criteria were demanding. She had 2 essentials, maturity and the ability to take orders. But how does one find out quickly if someone can take orders? She was more relaxed now, her smile carrying her ease of explanation. Who are the biggest disciplinarians in the country? The military. So she must choose a man from the military. Maturity was another problem. passionate young men swanning around bedrooms telegraphed trouble, and that most mature males were spoken for extended her search for several weeks. There would also be the problem of emotional links, getting fond of, falling in love, and jealousy, etc. But the search itself was rewarding. She was doing something unusual that was giving her pleasure for the first time for a long time. It was the way he carried himself, the way he placed his feet when he walked, his air of sureness, and the luck of his sudden arrival in front of her on the pavement. She had been following another man, but Jerome immediately overshadowed the other candidate. Picking him up had been another new experience, the first time she had actively chased someone else. But plans are made to be disrupted. Nicholas and his new novel had caused unwanted rumbles. But since last night, Jemma had sure-fired herself into another mindset. Of course, we are assuming the problem of Nicholas from a completely wrong perspective. They were taking off again at right angles. Jerome felt the tentacles of fresh ideas envelop him and drag him along a new path. It is a problem to be enjoyed, not feared, she said. Anyone actively enjoying problems was weird. Jerome shook his head mentally. Throughout his life, his troubles had formed a never-ending queue before him, and he spent his time fighting them. But it was well established that Jemma was a bit weird. How can Nicholas possibly know about us? Answer, he cannot. That is what makes it so wonderfully frightening, she said. There was a hold-on moment here. Jerome was not frightened. He did not have a husband who would beat him up if he found his wife having a lover. He was not under any threat. He was worried, but for Jemma, that Nicholas was a long-distance voyeur was intriguing, but nothing more. If we continue as if nothing has happened, it will be even more exciting. After all, where will it end? Nicholas and his book suddenly faded. She had set up the big queue. And Jemma, what do you think will happen? She turned from the sea towards him and gently stroked the side of his face. I shall not stop seeing you. Now it was the back of her hand that stroked tenderness. That is all I can say. Gently taking her hand, he kissed it. There was only one person who might know of their future, but Nicholas had not written that yet. They made no arrangements to meet. Jemma would leave Brighton by cab to go to her sister, who lived in Southampton. Staying with her sister had been her cover story, one of the few visits she was allowed to make alone by Nicholas. Nevertheless, often he would arrive, loaded with flowers, unexpectedly, of course, to surprise his wife. Neither Mathilde, Jemma's sister, or Jemma saw pleasure in his arrival, both convinced his bouquet was gift-wrapped with distrust. Yet her last 2 stays in Southampton had been Nicholas-free. His friendship with the whiskey bottle had become more demanding again, a liaison that tended to keep him in their apartment due to the lack of strength in his legs. Her explanations finished, she took his hand. Let's go back to your hotel this time. Nicholas will have to describe another location and another hotel room, she smiled. So that was the way it was to be now, baiting the storyteller, making him work harder, testing his powers of clairvoyance as much as possible. Jemma was adept at turning the tables, another of her talents, Jerome realized, to add to his growing list about the lady. The decision to cut their visit to Brighton short was not only based on the need to cause confusion for their author, but also because of confusion based on the weather forecast. The meteo had offered cloudy, breezy adjectives for the day. The rattle of plastic cups and other debris snatched from rubbish bins by a howling wind and the rivulets of rain glittering snakes on the windows established the weathermen's computers were also liable to lie through their keyboards. The sudden change to test Nicholas pleased Jemma. She was steam-rollering again. God had given Jerome's girlfriend a double dose of conviction, enabling ideas to become facts almost instantly. Nicholas's mystic powers were now a challenge, a sport to be played, an excitement in her cosseted existence. Her search for anticipation had been rewarded. They walked to his hotel in the rain, the low cloud hiding the horizon, merging the sea with the sky. Jerome kept the umbrella low, almost touching their heads, to hide them completely from any eyes that might be inquiring. Entering the hotel, Jerome made for the stairs to the bedrooms, but her touch guided him instead to the bar. I don't want to make love again yet. Jerome paused. Jemma had suggested their return to his hotel. Now she was going off at right angles again. She had made all the running, the decisions, and imagining of scenes so far in their affair, she asserted. Jerome's was a listening nod, waiting for the punchline. There was now a condition before they made love again. Now Jerome would have to think excitement, anticipation, and desire. He would have to create a vehicle for their sex games. Next time, he must take the lead in the bedroom. Otherwise, I shall start getting bored with you, darling, she smiled. Being presented with a demand for a blueprint for sex was unexpectedly enlightening on one hand, but coming from Jemma, it was not. He was now getting used to her out-of-the-box thinking, but her latest demand would certainly strain his small portion of imagination. During his service in the army, he had not been required to use it. The last 5 years in his dead-end job, his imagination had been definitely superfluous. Now he would have to light up the unused cells in his grey matter to create the required sparkle. So, do you have any ideas? She took his hand and stroked it. Just like that. Sex games on demand. Now she was asking him to use a part of his brain he had not used for years. No, 2 parts of his brain. Imagination and passion. His long pause, his pursed lips, and his stare at his pint of beer was not acceptable. When you come up with something to set the sheets alight, I will be waiting. Her smile as she stood was teasing. The kiss she blew him from the door was provocative, and the entrance, now empty, was his cue to get thinking. The train to Victoria was packed. Jerome was trapped between 2 couples. One pair spent the journey gazing into each other's eyes, whilst the second pair kissed away the 60-mile journey, only stopping for air when on the point of collapse. They were young, they were happy, and their problems would be everyone's problems. Comparing his relationship with Jemma, it established how age added complications to everything. And the complications continued as he stared out of the window, trying to invent sexually exciting scenes for their next meeting. The first question was obvious. What excited a man did not necessarily excite a female. Did she get excited because the man became excited? Uniforms turned Jemma on. Uniforms turned him off. Anticipation, stretched anticipation, brought writhing and smiling. He still hadn't made up his mind about the long drag towards sex, and now he had to create something more exciting for her to look forward to. How could he surprise a woman who seemed to have seen and done everything? How could he surprise a woman who mingled with some of the world's sex symbols? How could he better anticipation? Where could he find a sex maniac for advice on how they became sex maniacs, for some hints and tips? How the hell did you invent sex scenes? It was a big call. Her phone call came 3 days after he had returned to work. For once, her controlled voice on the telephone was absent. Her voice was high with excitement. Nicholas had not stopped writing since she had returned. He must read the email she had sent him the moment he was home, she informed. She would call him around 8. The call ended in mid-sentence, but not before Jerome heard a slurred voice in the background yelling, or trying to yell, demanding her attention. He spent the last 2 hours of work, the journey back home, and the walk from the bus stop to his house, wondering. Gemma's phone call had created more anticipation, but this time it was all his. The chatter from his old computer also joined the plot, taking, it seemed, twice as long to present the email on the screen. It was long, and it was detailed. A digital copy of the latest regurgitation from her husband. This time the accuracy of their trip to Brighton, their staying in separate hotels, their love-making, their sudden return because of the weather, did not slap him with astonishment. He half expected it. Indeed, now it would have been a disappointment had Nicholas not used his magic. The email could not be replied to, and strangely, he felt no need to contact Jemma. There was nothing he could do about the situation, and the words would evaporate uselessly. He had a choice of clubs to join here, anticipation or anxiety. He chose the former. Her promised call at 8 never arrived. It never arrived the next day at 8 or the next. Jemma had gone strangely quiet. 2 days later, her apology arrived for the missing call in the form of an SMS. Just 5 words, an abrupt and disconcerting contact. Had she called it a day? Was she bored with him? Had another excitement entered her life? Questions he could not answer, as his email and telephone remained blank for the rest of the week. Twice he pressed out her number on his telephone, but stopped before he jabbed the green button. The last few pages of Nicholas's book had brought their last meeting up to date, so he assumed Gemma's husband was pacing life out of his carpet in his study, waiting for the prompt of more material. Therefore, Jemma had nothing to report, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that perhaps Jemma was silently waiting for his blockbuster happening at their next meeting. A blockbuster of happening which at the moment did not exist. Read. This time her SMS had just that one word. Read what? He heard the letterbox click and the letter drop onto the doormat, but the car had gone by the time he reached the front door. He stared at the A4 envelope. A4 pages meant manuscripts, and manuscripts meant Nicholas. He had not had contact with Jemma for over 2 weeks. Nicholas must have been short of material. But he had not been. The manuscript was over 4 pages. Words hurled themselves at him from the paper, peppering his senses, stinging his reasoning. Astonishment swept the strength from his legs, causing his slump into an armchair. The story had changed. Now it was close up and personal, stripping away his privacy. The woman in the story was not mentioned. The narrative was all him. Each day since he had returned from Brighton stood tidily in new 12-point New Times Roman script, where he had gone to have lunch, where he had eaten, or take a hamburger or two, his bus ride home, and the killer paragraph, the evening he had cleaned his guns. It was 2 evenings out. The details of the task were vague, but that was incidental. Nicholas's fictional hero was also a collector of guns. Coincidences were flattened, steamrolled by disbelief. He sat, hunched before the incredible tale, his head propped between his hands for 20 minutes, fighting to stop his mind spinning in circles. His abrupt turn into his hairdresser for a quick trim, his visit on Tuesday to the cinema, and taking a pair of overalls smudged by oil stains to the laundrette were not recorded. Otherwise, virtually every move was wrapped up and offered enticingly to the reader. He rejected the thought to call Jemma almost before it hit. Although she had sent him the pages, she could do nothing. He would have to work out a way of living in someone else's goldfish bowl as they watched his every move. Nicholas's story is exploding. The woman in his book is about to die. Listen to the next episode of Imagine in 2 weeks.